right, everybody, welcome back to the Grips Archery channel. Today, I want to talk about the importance of our archery practice and the preparation for bow season. Something that is called muscle memory and why that is not actually an accurate term for what's really going on in our bodies, how it's all connected to fight or flight response and buck fever, and how all four of those are all intertwined together, and how we can use this information to become a better under pressure archer and bow hunter. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so I've been wanting to do this video for a while, and I've been mapping out how I wanted to cover all of this information. And a few discussions that I've had with a couple different people over the summer has really spurred me on to do this. And it has to do with shooting under pressure and nerves and so on. So we'll get there. But first and foremost, I want to talk about the importance of our archery practice. We hear it all the time. You need to go out there and practice, and go out and practice your hunting situations. And there is a good reason for that, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute. But in all actuality, the importance to this practice is, and the term that's used all the time is muscle memory. And so I'm going to switch gears, and I'm going to first of all dispel that term. So for any of you who are fans to the channel, you probably know what I used to do as my career. I am now retired. But I'm a high school science teacher, was a high school science teacher. I started teaching biological sciences in the 90s, in the early to mid 90s. 1994 was my first year. And over the years, I've taught a lot of different classes under the umbrella of biological sciences, but biology and zoology, I taught most of my career. But the big boy, the class that I taught over I think there's only 2 years out of my 32 years as a high school educator that I did not have at least one section of human anatomy and physiology. And in those 32 years, almost 6,000 school days, I was asked a lot of questions about the body. And in the beginning of my career, quite frankly, I couldn't answer a lot of those questions. And so when a student asks me a question, I would just simply tell them, I'm not really sure, but I'll look into it and get back to you. So I would then go research the answer to that question, answer their question, and then I would just retain that information. And the next time that question came down the pike, I had an answer locked and loaded and ready to go. You do that for 32 years and you learn a lot. And when I graduated from college, I thought I knew a lot. I know way more about the body and the inner workings of the body today than I knew fresh out of college, simply because of answering all these questions. And so I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and I'm going to go into my anatomy and physiology frame of mind. And I want to talk a little bit about this terminology known as muscle memory. And there's a point to this, and I'll get to it. But muscles don't remember jack. They are mindless automatons who simply do what they're told when they're told. And the overlords that they answer to are the neurons, specifically motor neurons, neurons that control your muscles. And I'm not going to get into the how the muscles contract, but that's their one and only job. When that neuron says go, and it doesn't matter how many muscle cells that one neuron controls, and in areas of high precision, that neuron might only control just a few, maybe 10 muscle cells. But in areas of bulk movement, that one neuron can control thousands of muscle cells. So, for example, the muscles that move your eyeballs, our eyeballs move with precision. There's a low ratio of neuron to muscle fiber. In your quads and in your glutes, doing a squat doesn't really require precision. So one neuron can control 2,000 to 3,000 muscle cells. But when that one neuron says go, those muscle fibers go, they contract. And they don't remember, they don't retain any information from that contraction. They just go when the neurons say go. So muscle memory is a misnomer. It sounds good, it flows good, but it kind of reminds me of heartburn. Heartburn is not heartburn. When you have heartburn, it's acid reflux. Your heart isn't burning, it's stomach acid is burning the inside of your esophagus. It's called acid reflux. It should really be called esophageal burn, but that doesn't sound as good as heartburn. Muscle memory is not your muscles don't remember, but the neurons that control those muscles, that's where I don't want to say memory, but I'm going to shift to a slide and explain how this comes about. So anytime you learn a new physical task, and it doesn't matter what it is, driving a car. I taught my son how to drive a stick shift, a 5-speed, a standard transmission car. And I said, once you learn, you'll never forget. And just like anybody that's learned, it was rough. He stalled it, didn't get his timing right with the clutch and the gas. But once he got it, he got it. So driving a car, shooting your bow, throwing a ball, shooting a basketball, playing guitar, it doesn't matter. Whatever that physical task is, the first time you do it, it's awkward. And you are learning how to do that task. And the pathway of the electrical signals that go to your muscles, that pathway is not heavily myelinated, okay? So I'm going to shift and go to this slide and show you what I'm talking about.
All right, so what we have here is a neuron or a nerve cell. And there are a variety of different shapes and sizes to neurons, but for our purposes, this is a standard neuron, and this type of neuron is a one-way street, meaning that it's only going to send a nerve impulse in one direction, and the direction is going to be down from this neuron, the way we're looking at it. It's going to go from the dendrite, which is featured right here. You can see it's labeled. The dendrite receives a nerve impulse either from the brain or another neuron. It can be any number of origins, but for our purposes, let's just say that it's coming from the brain, and that signal is received by one or two dendrites, and then that signal will be passed down the line, the cell body where the nucleus is kept, and then it will pass on down this long portion, which is called the axon. And then that signal will get to the end, the axon terminal, and it will be either connected to another neuron or, for our case here, what we're talking about, it will be connected to muscle fibers, muscle cells. And so when that signal passes on down this neuron and hits the terminal, it gets to what's called the motor end plate, and it will transfer that electrical signal into a chemical signal and will cause that muscle to contract without getting too complicated. But right here on the axon, the long portion here, I want you to look at these purple little coverings. And you can see here, as I was mentioning earlier, this is called the myelin sheath. And these Schwann cells are what secrete the myelin. And what happens is the electrical signal, when it hits the myelin sheath, instead of just continuing on down the axon, it jumps. And it will skip over and jump to this open spot between the myelin cells. And this opening between these areas of myelin is called the node of Ranvier. And then it will jump, and it hits this one, and it jumps, and it jumps, and it skips, and it can actually cause the axon to move easier down this long axon. Faster, possibly. We're talking microseconds, but this becomes, with this myelin sheath, this becomes a path of least resistance. And the more you use this particular neuron, the heavier, the thicker this myelin sheath, this area of myelin will become. The Schwann cell will secrete more myelin, and this will become thicker and bigger, and it becomes the path of least resistance. So when in times of stress or nervousness, or when you're distracted, this is going to be when your brain says to do something, when it's going to cause muscles to contract in any particular order. If given the option, this is the path that neuron will choose, that nerve signal will choose, because of these thickened myelin sheaths. And it becomes a path of least resistance. And because of this is where that terminology muscle memory comes into play, even though it's really not the muscle cells that we're remembering. It's the neural pathway that is heavily myelinated that becomes the path of least resistance. And I know it might be kind of semantics, but that's where that term of muscle memory comes from. Again, it has nothing to do with the muscle cells. It's the pathway, the neural pathway that controls those muscle cells. And it's not necessarily memory, but again, it is the path of least resistance due to the thickness of this myelin sheath.
Okay, so before we jump into the other parts, let's talk about how practice and your myelinization of that neural pathway is important, okay? There's a great video, I think it was a documentary. I don't know, I can't remember if it was on 60 Minutes or Nightline or one of those, but it was about Tim Tebow. And for those of you who know anything about Tim Tebow and his desire to be an NFL quarterback, one of the things that the NFL was saying was holding him back was his throwing motion. And what they criticized him over was dropping the football as he would drop back when he would go to throw. So he would be holding the ball here, and when he would go to pass, he would drop his arm, and that would make it more susceptible to getting slapped out by, a defender. So they wanted his throwing motion to go from here to here. Well, he had learned throughout his youth, he picked up that habit of dropping it. And to break that habit, he had to remyelinate a new pathway. And the coach that he worked with basically said, you need to get thousands and thousands of reps of just doing this to make this pathway the most myelinated neural pathway, so that when you are dropping back and you are reading coverages and evading blitzing linebackers and defensive linemen and stepping up into the pocket and scanning the field to see who's open and having all of those distractions running through your mind, when your brain says throw and you're not thinking about doing this, this happens and we don't revert to dropping the ball. Same thing happens with our archery practice. If you have focused and made sure that in your practice you're making good, clean shots, good form, good release, nice and smooth, perfect practice, then when times of pressure are thrust upon you, your brain will send that signal. And when you're distracted by the pressure of the situation, those nerves are going to be that nervous signal is going to take the path of least resistance. And the path of least resistance are the nerve cells that are the most heavily myelinated. And if that neural pathway is your good, perfect form, then that is more apt to happen. That shot will be, the odds of that shot happening in that way are greatly increased. So let's talk now. Let's go to part two, and let's talk now about buck fever and the fight or flight response. Okay, so if you've taken a psychology course or anything that talks about fight or flight, this is a reflex response that is left over from, when we either had to fight something or run from something for our lives. And it is when the environment, the stimulus in the environment, causes adrenaline to dump into your system. Okay, and I've had speakers talk about this in different situations. In the different educational, professional development stuff, and what they call it, the reptile brain. You may have heard that used before, where it means you're basically relying on your basic instincts, and that's fight or flight. And let me give you an example of how when you shift, when fight or flight kicks in and you get that adrenaline dump, your reflex to that situation is your body's going into survival mode. And so your consciousness is not real tied in to your thought process and your frontal lobe. And to demonstrate this, I want you to think about the last time you were in a heated argument with someone. I mean, they were really pushing your buttons and you were getting fired up. Your blood is boiling. You can feel your heart rate. I mean, they really got under your skin and you were involved in this verbal conflict with them, and you got, when that conflict ended and you went your separate ways and you got about 10 minutes out of that conversation and you calmed down, you had this thought, oh, I should have said this. That's an example. You're not tied into the thought provoking, the thinking part of your brain. You're shifting into that survival mode, and your body isn't relying on the logical part of our brain. We're trying to stay alive, and that's fight or flight. Buck fever drops us into fight or flight. So when you see that buck that you have all these pictures of with those beautiful big antlers and you feel that adrenaline dump, that's fight or flight. And you start to lose your ability to tap into that logical thought process. So when you are going to make that shot, then your brain isn't going to go to, oh, now remember, get the grip on the bow just right and make sure you're tucked into your anchor. And you're not thinking that. You're thinking, there he is, I got to do. And you're concentrating on your form, gets put on the back burner. This is where your perfect practice comes into play. If you have heavily myelinated the neural pathway that is the perfect archery shot with good form, good release, good anchor, having the hand grip just right, and having all of that done. If you have practiced that situation out of your stand, out of your saddle, sitting in a chair in your blind, if you have practiced it, the odds of you pulling that shot off in that stressful situation have just gone up. Now, I want to tell you a story. Again, big shocker. Grip's going to tell us another story. My dad. My dad did not bow hunt as a young man. There just simply weren't deer around when he was growing up and when he was a young man. But there were plenty of rabbits, and so he hunted rabbits. And then, if you've read my book of stories, Behind the Riser, you know that that's where I cut my teeth, was rabbit hunting. When I was 11, I passed my hunter safety course and I started hunting rabbits with him. And then as an adult, I transitioned into bow hunting and hunting white-tailed deer here in southern Ohio. And when I started doing that, then he kind of got interested into that. And he went during gun season. He was primarily just a gun hunter. And then he saw that, wow, if I were a bow hunter, I get a much larger season, much longer season. So we found him a bow, and I worked with him and got him shooting, and he got dialed in. And when he was hitting the dot at 20 yards, he said, "All right, man, I'm good." And he put his bow down. And I kept saying, "Now don't forget, you need to practice. You need to keep that repetition." And he goes, "Yeah, I got it. Well, he didn't do it, and he didn't practice. And he maybe shot 50 arrows before the season started. And this was his first time bow hunting. So he stepped out in the woods with a weapon relatively new to him. He shot recurve a little bit as a PE teacher. He had a unit on archery, and so he shot a little fiberglass recurve a little bit. But but as far as a compound goes, he was still pretty new. But in his mind, once he was hitting that dot at 20 yards, he was good. He didn't need to practice. And he stepped out into the deer woods that year with his compound bow and conservatively under 100 shots in his life using a compound bow. And he went out into the woods, got set up on this hill that had a terrace of saddles and benches, and he was on one bench overlooking another bench, and he heard that telltale. He turned and looked, and here came a nice 8-pointer, and that buck walked down the bench below him, just to his left, perfect, for a tree stand shot for a right-handed archer. And he was so shook up, according to his after action assessment. He said, "I drew the bow back," and he said, "I forgot what to do." And he said he caught himself aiming, looking down the arrow as if he were shooting a recurve. And then he said, "No, this isn't a recurve. I have sight pins." And so he said, "I wasn't even looking through my peep sight, and I had to reset and get my anchor down and look through my peep." And he said, "When I looked through the peep," and he said, "I went to shoot, and when he shot, he flinched so bad that he did not miss the buck high or low. He shot behind him. So at 10, 11 yards, he missed a whitetail buck by a couple feet left because he did not heed the recommendations of his instructor, and he did not practice. And he thought, "Well, I'm hitting a dot. I'm good. I don't need to practice." Yeah, when it's calm and beautiful and there's no pressure, Sure. But you add in that adrenaline dump and that fight or flight / buck fever kicks in, it changes things. All right, now I want to talk about a couple conversations that I had with people over the summer that I alluded to earlier that brought me into this, to doing this video. So, for anyone that's watched the recent videos that I did, I'll put a card up there about my ASA comparison, IBO ASA video. I shot 2 ASA Pro-Ams this year with Derek Craig of New Day Outdoors. And he confided in me. He said, I'm telling you, he says, I can't believe how nervous I am the first few shots. He said, it happens every time. I get out there, he's new to competitive 3D archery, and he'll be the first one to tell you, man, I'm the king of my backyard. But when you put that pressure of that competition, it is the best way to simulate that buck fever and fight or flight nerves. I know a lot of people will say, I want to get that simulation, so I will jog or do push-ups to get your heart rate up. And exercise stress to increase your heart rate and your respiration rate is totally different than stress, emotional and nervous stress, adrenaline. They're two totally different things. They may feel the same, but they're different. And so putting yourself in that situation is a huge, huge help. And here just recently, we had the Dust Off 3D shoot that was tied to the Mobile Hunters Expo here in Wilmington. And the shoot was a great success. I worked a long time on mapping that out and going out and getting the trees. The course was awesome. I got a lot of great feedback from everybody that participated, but I talked to a couple people, and one was a gentleman who is pictured here, was at our first shoot, and he came back to our second shoot, Corey. And Corey, when talking to him, I said, "Man, you shot this last year, right?" And he said, "Yeah, I did, man." He said, "This one is awesome. This is great. I'm having so much fun." And he goes, "And I just want to do better than last year." And he looked at me and he said, "Last year, I was a wreck. My nerves." He said, "I was so nervous that he shot -4s, and our scoring is a wound, which would be traditionally a 5, is scored as a -4. He said, I shot 3 -4s in a row." And he said, and I got that, then I settled down and I did okay. And I looked at him and I said, well, how we doing this year? And he goes, "I don't want to say." And I knew what that meant, so I didn't push it. But later on, he said, "Man, I did much better." And I said, "Well, that's a victory in itself. You came, you battled your nerves and you got through it, and you didn't shoot any -4s. So, huge improvement. Good for you." And then at the end of that shoot, we ended up having a shoot off. And we had a tie between these two guys, Luke Lacey and Daniel Lemon. You may know Daniel from Do It Yourself Hunter, and he shot fixed pins. And both of these guys were dead tie 228 with 14 12s on a 20 target course. That's some shooting. I don't care what your sight is. If you are no lens, your pins, I'm an old pin shooter. That's some great shooting, regardless of your sight. But to do it with pins, that's impressive. And so both of these guys, they stand up. Luke went 12, 12, 10, first 3 targets. Daniel went 10, 8, 10, and then ended with a 12 at the end. So he shot 50 on 5 targets. There's about 100 people watching. And both of these guys, they seem like they are cool and collected. And both of them, as I was chatting with them while we were doing the shoot off, Luke looked at me and goes, he just went 12, 12, 10, and everybody's thinking, my gosh, he's got ice in his veins. He looked at me and says, man, I'm a nervous wreck. But Luke, I know Luke has shot a lot and still shoots a lot. Daniel came over after about the third target, and I said, man, that was a good shot. And he looked at me and he says, boy, this shoot-off stuff, man, this is tense, which is his way of saying, I'm a nervous wreck. But again, he looks like he is just controlled and cool under fire. Guess what? He shoots a lot. And because they have practiced that sequence and that perfect shot thousands and thousands of times, when the pressure's on, they're able to hold it together. So get out there, shoot from your saddle, shoot from your stand, sit in a chair, or just stand there in the backyard and pound dots, shoot 3D, practice, practice, practice. And then once you've got that shot sequence under calm, smooth conditions, now you add the pressure. There's no better way to simulate the pressure of buck fever than putting pressure on yourself. Go to a 3D shoot. Go to a national pro-am. Go shoot the IBO and shoot in the world championships. Go with your buddies to a local shoot and put money on the line. Loser buys dinner. Loser's got drinks at the bar. Whatever it is, loser buys a case. Whatever it is, put pressure on yourself to practice performing that shot and executing that shot under tense, stressful situations. And I predict that if you can do that and practice putting yourself in those stressful situations or practice under those stressful situations, then when that buck of a lifetime or your target buck walks underneath you, the odds of you successfully making that shot have just gone up. Okay? So hopefully this has inspired you to put your phone down, grab your bow, go out in the yard, and get that practice in. Okay? I think that's going to about wrap up tying all this together and getting our shot sequence. The important thing is to get that shot burned into that neural pathway, myelinate those neurons to get that shot sequence so it comes off second nature, and make yourself a better under pressure archer when it counts, right? So if you saw something in this video that you like, as always, I ask that you click like and subscribe. I greatly appreciate it. And even just by watching the video, I greatly appreciate it, especially if you made it all the way to the end. Most people don't make it all the way to the end. All right? So, as always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later. And don't worry, I'm not worried about embarrassing my dad. My dad couldn't find the internet with a compass and a protractor. He has an email. I don't know why. He never checks it. So the odds of him ever seeing this video are pretty slim.